Interpreting Finnegans' Wake through speculative rhythm, or the philosophy of Hegel, who thought of his philosophy as speculative. Meaning what? Speculate, from the Latin speculare, to spy, observe, to look around, and the Latin for mirror is speculum, which gave rise to the German Spiegel, mirror, and of course the word has connotations to guess or to conjecture, hence in the 18th century to engage in risky commercial ventures. In the philosophy of Nicholas of Cusa, following St. Paul, seeing through a glass darkly, speculum refers to a mirror, and it's a key concept. It is a key concept in his work. He uses this term often in the phrase per speculum in enigmata, through a mirror in an enigma, to describe our limited human understanding of God and the divine realm. God, being infinite beyond human comprehension, can only be grasped indirectly, like an image reflected in a mirror. Cusanus, author of Unlearned Ignorance, features in the wake: the smarter the spin of the top, the sounder the span of the bottom. The smarter the top, the brain, the bigger the bottom. Bottom, that surface of a thing on which it stands or rests. Its base, also as it happens the basis, capital or resources for a commercial enterprise. As in speculating, everything connects. Anyway, with Hegel's speculative philosophy, we have to forget all that. Hegel does not associate speculation with the mirror. He is very much against the idea that God or anything else is inaccessible to direct cognition and can be discerned only in an image. He contrasts speculative philosophy with the philosophy of reflection, and although the reflection of opposites and other determinations of reflection into each other is involved in speculation, such reflection is only one phase of speculative logic. Although philosophical speculation is like commercial speculation, in going beyond what is immediately present and making objective what is initially subjective. But there is no implication of risk or uncertainty in Hegel's philosophical speculation. Speculation is basically an attempt to grapple with the full scope of thinking's activity. The conventional attitude towards truth and falsehood tries to create permanent markers among constantly shifting stands, and looking for the wrong kinds of signs in this attitude is tempted into skepticism or relativism once its limited context falls apart. Hegel offers us a way to take seriously the critique of truth that is associated with postmodern thinkers. But instead of abandoning truth for social construction or relativism, he suggests a dynamic conception of the true-false relationship that is rooted in the abiding nature of thinking itself. The true includes the negative or the false. There is a pattern or rhythm to the way thinking moves, and this can give a sort of repose amidst activity rather than being abandoned to ceaseless change that thwarts all reason. Just as meditation techniques concentrate on the calm shape of the moving breath to bring stability to a wandering mind, Hegelian speculative philosophy focuses on the regular intervals of negativity to bring repose and order to the restless activity of thinking. Hegel didn't actually have a method, though, a method called dialectic or speculative dialectic. Philosophy cannot have a special method over and above its content. The distinguishing feature of content is that its content is inseparable from its form, which is actually the condition of music, which is where I'm going with this, in case you're wondering. In other words, the method of philosophy is inseparable from the subject matter of philosophy. Method cannot be isolated and discussed on its own. Philosophy is thinking about thinking. Philosophy is thinking, that's the content. Philosophy is thinking, that's the form. About thinking, that's the content. As we reveal more of the content, we reveal more of the method. Hegel has no specialized method. When he discusses, for instance, dialectical movement through determinate negation, it's not a method, not something applied to thinking to make it work in a different way than it normally does. Rather, the nature of thinking itself is the dialectic. Whether you are aware of it or not, you all think dialectically. Thinking is naturally and inherently dialectic. When we begin thinking through an issue, we often stake out two opposed conceptual extremes in order to identify a terrain of thinking. In philosophy, it might be finitude and infinity, or matter and spirit. This tendency of thinking is so strong that we often turn ideas that are not even logically opposed into conceptual extremes. For instance, capitalism and socialism. We also find that as soon as the contraries are available and the field of inquiry is defined, the differences begin to interact and point us toward new thoughts. So speculative philosophy takes thinking as it is, though not in the piecemeal way, but as a whole. And Hegel identifies three practices that obstruct our self-moving content. First, borrowing a method from subordinate sciences, like mathematics for instance. Second, leaving method up to immediate assurances. And third, using whatever method best achieves some external aim. So by falling into any of these methodological traps, we find ourselves pursuing pseudo-philosophy. Our inquiry may concern a philosophical content, the essence of God for instance, but the inquiry will be conducted in a way that fails to let the content develop by itself, and so the resulting presentation will be pseudo-philosophical, even as the content taken in itself is legitimately philosophical. So Hegel contrasts external reflection with innate reflection. He contrasts thinking as a means to an end with thinking as an end in itself. External reflection offers justifications for some content based on an outside consideration, principle or rule. Innate reflection allows for the free play of self-justification and self-undermining that belongs to any living, changing, moving or developing content as it presents itself and expresses its many sides in thinking. Philosophy must therefore be presented as an activity for its own sake. We are accustomed to treating sentient beings like ourselves as autonomous, so we should think about philosophical content in the same way. For philosophy's method, so to speak, to be joined with its content, we must learn to think about every philosophical thought content as self-moving. So, in the case of the syllogism, for instance, we must think of a syllogism as we think of an organism. Where is it going? What does it want? What is the source of its life and movement? How might this thought be connected in an evolutionary or developmental chain with other thoughts? What kind of life governs them all and governs the transitions between them? And this, of course, matches onto the wake. The wake lives. It is like an organism, in that it interrogates itself, in acting active, responsive, albeit it's often hard to get to the meaning of the questions about itself, its purposes, its capability, its genuineness, its range, and of course it often undermines itself. Who is he who does not know Quinnigan? Quinnigan, in the context of the Ballad of Tim Finnegan, a central motif of the novel. The ballad tells the story of a man who falls from a ladder, seemingly dies, brought back to life at his wake by whiskies splashing on his forehead. The name Quinnigan is used in the narrative as a variant or corruption of the original Finnegans Wake ballad, reflecting the fluid and fragmented nature of storytelling in the text. So, questions there in Latin. Qui, quae, quod, Latin. who, which, quot, Latin, how many, each, every, who's who, and exagmination, exagmin, Latin, out of the multitude, plus examination, and incarminare, Italian, to put on the right road. So, these type of dealings can only be carried out by things regarded as properly living, and the wake responds to the reader in an active way. It cannot be any non-living abstraction, since the living is concrete, chaotic, unable to yield a perfect knowledge or absolute truth, but can suggest fragmentary possibilities by way of questioning, and from such possibilities can explore and put to the test the undetermined unfurling of the future. An essential element of all living organisms is that for the purpose of maintaining their internal and external environment in a state of self-regulating dynamic equilibrium, will put to work a number of self-corrective mechanisms, a cycle whereupon the output of a system is fed back as input, creating a continuous process of adjustment and control. The wake operates similarly through a play of tensions and mystifications, fragmentations, libidinal energy, similar to a musical counterpoint in which the relationship of two or more simultaneous musical lines or voices that are harmonically independent are independent in rhythm, or point-counterpoint, which is a method of presenting arguments in which opposing viewpoints are acknowledged and then refuted, creating a discussion both balanced and persuasive. So rhetorical techniques works like this: we concede the point, we proceed to refute it with our own evidence and reasoning. If the tempo proceeds at too rapid a pace, its contrast will make an entrance, at times slowly and imperceptibly, at other times suddenly and impactfully. The wake thereby enacts the very kind of mechanisms employed by living organisms in surveying and concisely correcting errors through a naturalistic method. Speculative philosophy is a totality of knowledge organized as a system without rigid either-or distinctions between concepts that are dialectically or speculatively related. Authentic presentation of philosophy is a speculative presentation, or a presentation that presents dialectical movement itself as the central subject matter, as opposed to those works that concern fixed propositions, finite objects or categories. The rhythm of an organic whole. Hegel often begins not only his books but his lectures by problematizing the common expectations attached to the textual form he's about to engage, about how the subject at hand should be presented. To this end, Hegel often discusses the title of some word in the title, for instance logic or aesthetic or right, signaling that his presentation will differ from what his audience might expect from the title. By countering an expectation, negating an anticipated prejudice, he makes a first step into his subject. He begins not positively, but negatively, not with assertions, but with denials. And I anticipate my thesis to be similar. It will differ in what might be expected in a thesis. The standard structure of a thesis being an introduction, in which you say what you're going to say, then you say it, then a conclusion in which you say what you just said. My thesis won't be like that. A reader with a more determined task for thought in hand, for example, someone writing a persuasive book defending a metaphysical thesis, would be unable to observe the flow of thinking. This passage from Jolus nicely characterizes the wake and how to approach it. This is from a collection of critical essays published in 1929, 10 years before the wake was published. which when it was known as the work in progress. The title is taken from the wake that I quoted earlier. The passage sums up what I've been saying: an internal rhythm differentiated in proportion to the contents, words compressed into stark plastic accents, having the tempo of the river Livy itself flowing into the sea, everything that the automatic life shows of interest in relation to the philosophical pattern undertaken. The most effective way of learning another language is not through studying or memorizing grammatical rules, but listening to a language's rhythm. Focusing upon the rhythm of a language can significantly improve listening, comprehension and pronunciation. Every language has its natural rhythm that aids in understanding how words are connected and where pauses should be, and this is true of the language of the wake that opens rhythmically with river run past even Adams, that swerve of shore to bend of bay brings us by commodities vicus of recirculation back to house, castle and environs. Listening and seeing are contraries that are brought to terms in the wake by a recirculation to music, where many things coincide. All art, as said Walter Pater, constantly aspires towards the condition of music, by which he meant content and form are one. Joyce once referred to the wake as a concert suite, albeit limited by the nature of words. Finnegans gets the finenesses of poetry when music. Finnegans, a poet to whom Finn McCool, Irish legendary warrior, who features throughout the wake, went to learn poetry from, and for whom he cooked the salmon of wisdom. Finesse and vanities. Joyce approaches what the critic I.A. Richards called the music of ideas. Like a Bach cantata, there are several things going on at once. Speculation is the resolution of contraries, and contraries characterize the living selfhood of living beings, that quality of tension impelling a developmental movement. In music, the tonal center for a musical key supplies the value to each note, and the movements between notes become meaningful movements upon some key being established, upon some tonal center being discovered. Though if the tonal center is too evident and the musical composition too predictable, it loses its dynamic quality, so there must be a center, but not a rigid or fixed center. Similarly, a rhythmic center in poetry must be sufficiently flexible to now allow for natural speech, while rendering it more dynamic. So too in speculative rhythm, there is a floating center, which is not a matter of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which you might have heard in connection with Hegel. But that's not Hegel. As far as I know, he only mentions it once in a lecture, in connection with Kant, though he does call it the rhythm of knowledge. While the speculative rhythm imitates the floating quality of living selfhood, its unresolved unity, whereby there is no fixed synthesis, no fixed endpoint, for a synthesis of two clear contraries would be dogmatism. The speculative proposition is not the standard subject-predicate form, such as appeared in the syllogism I mentioned earlier, but rather the subject flows into the predicate flows into the subject. Their unity emerges as harmony. Speculative thinking turns towards the whole developing movement rather than isolated accented moments. There are no properly separate standalone thesis or antithesis moments, no fixed parts in speculative philosophy that can be opposed to other fixed parts to produce some third fixed part. Rather, every part is opposed to itself internally. Every part is an eternally intense living moment, and the whole that is arranged out of them delivers stability and stillness, merely because it comprehends every intelligible instance, not because it grounds them all upon some fixed principle of foundation. Cuckoo. The sound uttered by doves and pigeons, cooing. A sound resembling this. Catching snapshots, a record of events or observations made on a particular subject, especially when intended for the writer's future consideration. Distant relations or connections with facsimiles, representations, familiar phrases, ravishing shadow and lovely line extended in space with respect to concrete material form or actual reality, or pertaining to that which so exists opposed to the abstract. We get a sense of its music and rhythm there. And so, like music, the method is inseparable from the content, as harmony maintains oppositions. Speculative thinking is musical thinking. As tensions shape ongoing harmonies whereby standard propositions are held loosely in one's thinking, and a more expansive relation is allowed to emerge between them. The musical metaphor is especially illuminating. We can change the accent, and that changes the way that it comes across. It changes the rhythm. There is interpenetration, things interpenetrate each other, and this is rhythm, a kind of harmony of coming together. The subject dies away while maintaining the rhythm of the concept coursing through the wake. Nullified with dreams of harmony. Thank you.